Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian by Sherman Alexie addresses serious issues regarding the First Nations community through the eyes of a teenage boy, Arnold Spirit Jr. Published in 2007, Part-Time Indian sheds a light on the many troubles that a modern-day Aboriginal community would face. However, Arnold presents a lighthearted tone that allows the reader to relate to his feelings, even though they may not be able to connect to his situation. While the book contains a few flaws, they don't interfere with the overall message or the reader's enjoyment of the novel. The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian achieves its goal of revealing the horrible living conditions of the First Nations while also providing an entertaining and amusing read. The story begins with Arnold explaining the many complications that he has experienced in the past. This includes a detailed description of his excess cerebral spinal fluid that was removed at birth. Some of the side effects include 10 extra teeth, poor eyesight, and a very awkward frame, with a big head, large hands and feet, as well as a very skinny body. For these reasons, Arnold, or Junior as he's called on the reserve, is subjected to constant bullying by his peers. However, his best friend Rowdy is there to protect him, most of the time. Rowdy's difficult home life and short temper are very apparent in the way he acts throughout the book. The two are constantly bugging each other and getting into fights. Arnold's favorite hobby is comic book illustration and general drawing. The reader is able to see these drawings throughout the book, which really makes Arnold's spirit feel like a real person. After a brief suspension from the school, his teacher approaches him and tells him that he needs to leave the res school, stating that he should not put his talent to waste. Arnold makes the decision to switch schools immediately, angering his friend Rowdy, who refuses to talk to him. Initially, Arnold has a difficult time adjusting to his new school, but after a few rough encounters, he gains the students' respect. While he is enjoying his school life, Arnold faces the consequences of leaving back at the reservation, where he is mocked and shamed for changing schools. It certainly doesn't help that he must suffer through the deaths of multiple relatives. It all works out in the end, however, when he reunites with Rowdy and receives partial acceptance from the reservation. Now, let's get to the real part of this video. As soon as the story begins, the reader is addressed in a lighthearted tone by the protagonist, Arnold Spirit Jr. However, it is quite obvious that subject matter is serious, creating an interesting dynamic that gives the book character. I found myself relating to Arnold's situation, even though I have never gone through anything remotely close to what he suffers through. Sherman Alexie has created a character that many can relate to. The way that he tells the story makes him feel like a real person. And at one point, I was sure that it must be heavily based on a true story. The various drawings help contribute to this feeling and develop Arnold's character without using words. For example, it is apparent that he put much more effort into some drawings than others. This shows that the drawing is important to him and creatively shows his feelings without the book directly stating it. The drawing of Penelope is far more detailed and realistic than one of his joke sketches. This form of communication is very engaging and kept me entertained throughout the whole read. I enjoyed seeing the story come to life through these sketches and is something that I think other novels could benefit from as well. One of my favorite parts about this book is the way that Arnold is almost presented as two different people. Junior, as he's called on the reservation, is a wimpy Indian boy who is subject to constant bullying from his peers. Arnold is an athletic kid who attends an all-white school and is the star of his basketball team. Hence the title, Part-Time Indian. This dual personality setup makes Arnold and Junior two interesting and distinct characters. The way that Arnold thinks and interacts with others is different than the more timid Junior back on the reserve. Sometimes he fails to fit into either of those categories, instead floating between a white kid on a First Nations reserve or an Indian boy at an all-white school. What I mean is that sometimes he feels out of place in his surroundings, like being an outcast on the reserve that people point at and make fun of. This inner conflict creates a compelling subplot that exists throughout most of the novel. Arnold presents these confused emotions in a way that anyone can relate to. The feeling of being out of place is something that many people have experienced and is just another way that the book connects the reader to an abnormal situation. Arnold's somewhat unreliable storytelling gives the book much more emotion than a third-person perspective. I fully support Sherman Alexie's decision to write it in first person, and I couldn't imagine the book feeling as sentimental without it. Arnold's living conditions in everyday life is taken much more seriously by the reader when a character that they feel close to is going through them. Every time that Arnold failed, I felt bad for him, and every time that he succeeded, I was proud of him. Of all the novels that I've read, Arnold Spirit Jr. is one of the most realistic fictional characters because he addresses others in a way that a kid actually would, and thinks like a real person would. His ignorance and unreliability affect certain parts, but also communicates the full story. While Part-Time Indian is a great novel, it is not without its flaws. The book uses many cliches, such as the high school drama story and the broken friendship plot. Because of its reliance on these cliches, the writing can become stale and predictable. Everyone knew that he would become a star basketball player as soon as he stepped on the court, and he was obviously going to get the girl at his new school. His reuniting with Rowdy may have been emotional, but it was painfully obvious. The best thing that I can say about the core story is that it is decent, which is not something I expected out of a book that is hailed as one of the best of the past decade. Part-Time Indian doesn't try anything new, and it is this lack of ambition that depreciates the value of the story. However, I can most certainly say that these flaws do not impact the main message and don't heavily degrade Arnold's character. I'm going to give the absolutely true diary of a part-time Indian an 8 out of 10 because of its important message while still being an entertaining read. Many books are too focused on being a political commentary that they forget that their main purpose is to provide an enjoyable experience to the reader. However, Part-Time Indian does a good job of connecting serious issues with a decently entertaining story. Thank you for watching my review, and I hope that you enjoyed hearing my thoughts on this book.